Today's lesson is going to focus on the Nile River. What we need to remember about the Nile River mostly is the fact that it was considered the lifeblood of Egypt. Now, what do we mean by that? Essentially, if the Nile River does not exist, most likely the Egyptian civilization doesn't exist. It not only provides a method of transportation, but it also provides a lush landscape full with wheat and barley and sesame, rye and grapes. It basically provides all the essential elements needed in order for the Egyptians to survive. Now, what makes the Nile River so unique is the fact that it's one of the only rivers to actually flow in a northward direction. As you can see down in South Sudan, Uganda area, there is a mountain range down there that in the wintertime the mountaintops would have snow and ice, and they would begin to melt in the springtime when the weather begins to change. And because of that, in this higher elevation, it progresses northward towards the Mediterranean Sea. And right before the Nile River enters into the Mediterranean Sea, we have what's called a river delta, which is this fan-shaped area of water that essentially fans out and opens up before it gets to this major body of water. You know, along the river as well, we have different cataracts. Now, a cataract is just simply a waterfall, and there are a few cataracts along the Nile River as well. The other aspect of this is the fact that when you have living along the Nile River, many city-states would start in the north and they would progressively move their way south. Now, Egypt is going to become this massive unified kingdom in a sense. What makes them different than what we learned about in our past unit with the Tigris and Euphrates and Mesopotamia is the fact that you had all these different city-states, each city-state united against itself, keeping itself separated, and you would see a lot of fighting and division. But Egypt is going to become a little more unified. The other strategic purpose of being in Egypt is the fact that you have, to the east, you have the Arabian Desert, and to the west, you have the Sahara Desert. Having thousands of miles of open desert area makes it very difficult for invading forces. Imagine having to walk nearly 1,000 miles across the hot terrain, that you're limited with supplies, you have a very limited amount of resources. During the day you could experience temperatures up to 115 degrees, and sometimes at night the temperatures can dip down in the 40s, sometimes even below freezing. This is a very, very difficult environment to live in, especially to travel. In most cases, you can't light a fire at night because the wind would blow the fire out. So just by having your civilization along the Nile River, it would be a tremendous benefit. Now, the Egyptians also were extremely religious people, and they would actually look at and do prayers to the actual Nile River. Here we see there's a prayer that the Egyptians would say in order to the Nile to basically praise it. They believed that if they continued to pray to the Nile, that the Nile would continue to provide the necessary resources in order for their civilization not only to grow, but to keep prospering. Notice there's also a common theme in many of these, in every one but two, that it keeps referring to he. It goes to show you that how the Egyptians view their gods, whether it be male or female. Now, the Nile River, like I mentioned earlier, has different cataracts. Now, the pictures on the right-hand side just give you a visual representation of the landscape that's close to the Nile River. I mean, it contains a lot of flax and wheat, barley, rye, sesame, grapes. Even more importantly, too, there's another plant that's going to be pretty significant to the Egyptians, and that's papyrus. And this papyrus will be used later on to actually make paper. And if you look at that picture in the upper right-hand corner, you can see this does not look like a desert. You know, most desert we see is just, sometimes flat, but sometimes hilly, but there's a lot of sand, a lot of heat. And here we see it's the complete opposite. There's a lot of green, a lot of landscape, a lot of resources for the Egyptians to take advantage of. The other difference between the Egyptians and what we learned about in our past unit with the Sumerians is the fact that the Sumerians would basically dig a canal system. This canal system would go from the Tigris and Euphrates to a Sumerian city-state. But the Egyptians are going to dig what's called a basin. Now, a basin is basically going to be a hole in the ground that will be used to store water. Down in the lower left-hand corner, there is an Egyptian using an apparatus called a shadoof. Now, the shadoof is you're able to lower this bucket down in the water. It has a counterweight on there, and you can pour the water into these canisters. And because of our friends to the north, the Sumerians, with their invention of the wheel, the wagon has been invented, and you can basically take the water to their basin and then help water the crops. So it's going to be a little less labor intensive than trying to dig these canal systems from your water source all the way to your farmland. We look at some more modern day pictures of just the actual landscape. As you can see, I mean, close by the embankment, imagine trying to go down that bank with a bucket of water and trying to keep your footing. You have animals down there. So the shadoof was a very, very important invention. It just made life easier for the Egyptians to get and have access to the resources that they needed. This picture here we see in the background there of the different, the landscape, and how I like this picture because you see how it goes from this sandy, sort of rockiest terrain to this plush landscape as you get closer to the Nile River. Now, a lot of this area that we see here would eventually flood every spring, very similar to the Tigris and Euphrates River. The only difference is really that the Nile River was at times more predictable. It would flood around the same time every year. You can see a distinct difference here. You have the Nile River along the right-hand side, and there's this complete area of just vegetation that the Egyptians can use and take advantage of and to survive. And as we go beyond that to the what I call the western side, or the left side if you're looking at the picture, you have this sandy area that is pretty desolate, and there's just nothing there. So living out in that western portion, your civilization is really not going to prosper. And this explains to many historians and scientists why all of these early civilizations need to establish themselves close to a body of water. Not only are we looking at just as far as a food element and a survival element, but again, our friends to the north, the Sumerians, were able to develop the sailboat. Now the Egyptians can actually travel north and south up until you get to a cataract, the Nile River, and they also now have access to the Mediterranean Sea, and the merchants that live in not only Mesopotamia but Egypt can travel to greater distances and trade and barter with different city-states. Here's one more picture that you see in the background there. This is the city of Memphis, and we can see again, the landscape and the water of the Nile River. Now, for the sake of this lesson, we're going to work on a writing prompt. And this writing prompt I want you to complete before you end up coming to class tomorrow. Now, we've done other writing prompts in the past. We know that the breakdown of the way that you would do a written response is the fact that you would have a topic sentence. Remember, that's what the TS stands for. Your topic sentence should tell me, as the reader, what it is that I'm about to read. What question are you going to answer at this point in time? You're going to follow up your introduction there, your topic sentence, with 3 concrete details, 3 facts that are basically supporting your answer, and then you're going to have your concluding sentence as well. So the question that you're going to answer is, how did the Egyptians' use of the Nile River compare with the Sumerians' use of the Tigris and Euphrates River? Remember, you're going to do your topic sentence, your 3 concluding details, and your concluding sentence, and we will go over that in class tomorrow. Thank you.